The leather straps on Malcolm Zeller's tent had been sliced cleanly through, a fact he discovered only when the canvas collapsed onto his bedroll as dusk settled over the Mountain Pass campsite. He stood in the dirt holding the severed cord, blinking at it with the confused expression of a man whose day had just taken a turn toward the absurd, while around him, a dozen other travelers busied themselves with cook fires and evening chores. The temperature had already dropped enough that his breath misted, and the forecast called for a hard frost before morning. "My tent's warmer," a voice said behind him, low and matter-of-fact. "If you need shelter." Malcolm turned to find an orc woman watching him from beside her own tent, a sturdy canvas structure twice the size of his ruined one. She stood perhaps 5'7", with smooth green skin that caught the firelight, small tusks that curved just past her lower lip, and pointed ears pierced through with simple copper hoops. Her build was athletic and unmistakably feminine, with strong shoulders and capable hands that suggested someone who worked outdoors for a living. She wore practical traveling clothes, leather trousers and a wool tunic, with her black hair braided back from her face. He glanced at the collapsed tent, then back at her. "That's generous of you. I was just contemplating whether I could fashion a serviceable lean-to from desperation and stubbornness." "You could not," she said. "It will be below freezing tonight. A woman of firm opinions, I appreciate that." Malcolm dragged his pack out from under the canvas and slung it over his shoulder. Malcolm Zeller, traveling tinker and occasional purveyor of questionable advice. Lyra Calloway. She watched him approach with dark eyes that revealed nothing. "I hunt for the fur trade. I am heading to the autumn market at Crosswater Ridge." "What a coincidence. So am I." Malcolm dropped his pack beside her tent. "I have tinned goods to sell, and I hear the pilgrimage draws enough crowds to make the trip worthwhile." Lyra nodded once, then turned to stoke her fire. Malcolm studied the tent arrangement, noting the careful way she had secured everything, the efficient layout of her gear. This was someone who spent half her life on the road. The other travelers at the campsite gave them a wide berth. Malcolm caught the sidelong glances, the way conversations dropped when Lyra walked past. An elderly human woman actually moved her bedroll farther from Lyra's tent when she thought no one was looking. Malcolm had seen it before. Orcs were tolerated on the frontier, sometimes even respected for their skills, but never quite welcomed. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked, settling onto a log near the fire. "I left my cabin 4 days ago. The ridge is 3 more days north if the weather holds." Lyra pulled dried meat from her pack and offered him a strip. "My thanks." He accepted it, noting calluses on her palms that spoke of bowstrings and skinning knives. "Do you make this route every autumn?" "For 8 years now." She sat across the fire from him, her posture relaxed but alert. "The market pays well for winter pelts. What brings a tinker to a hunter's gathering?" "Optimism and a merchant's faith that people always need pots mended." Malcolm grinned at her. "Also, I was thrown out of Millbrook for suggesting the mayor's daughter might enjoy a more adventurous life than her father planned." "Did she?" "Enormously. She is now running a coaching in 2 counties over and, by all accounts, infinitely happier." He bit into the dried meat. "Her father remains unforgiving." Lyra's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes that might have been amusement. "You make a habit of disrupting families, only the ones that need disrupting." Malcolm stretched his legs toward the fire. "And you, any scandals in your past?" "I kill animals and sell their skins. It is not a profession that generates much gossip." She fed another branch to the flames. "Though there was a trader who tried to cheat me on a price last year." "What happened?" He did not try again. Malcolm laughed outright at that. "I can imagine." Tell me, is that tent genuinely warmer, or were you just taking pity on a stranger? It is larger and I have better insulation. Lyra's gaze flicked to his collapsed tent. And you would have frozen, probably, though I am resourceful. He studied her across the fire, trying to read her expression. She gave away little, but there was something deliberate in the way she had made the offer. Not pity. Something else. As darkness settled fully over the campsite, the other travelers retreated to their own shelters. The temperature continued to drop, and Malcolm was grateful for the fire's warmth. Lyra moved around the camp with efficient grace, checking her gear and securing provisions. She worked with the confidence of someone who had performed these tasks 1,000 times. I should mention, Malcolm said as she returned to the fire, that I snore, occasionally. My brother claims it sounds like a badger fighting a handsaw. I have heard worse. Lyra gathered her cooking pot. Are you hungry, starving, now that you mention it? She prepared a simple stew from dried vegetables and more of the meat, seasoning it with herbs from a leather pouch. The smell made Malcolm's stomach clench with hunger. He had been surviving on hard bread and cheese for 2 days. You are a better camp cook than I am, he observed. I usually just char things over the fire and hope for the best. That explains why you are so thin. I prefer to think of it as wiry. But Malcolm grinned, pleased that she was looking at him enough to notice his build, very heroic and dashing in the right light. It is dark now. I cannot judge. Lyra ladled stew into wooden bowls and handed him one. They ate in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Around the campsite, other travelers had settled in for the night. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Malcolm watched Lyra over the rim of his bowl, noting the precise way she ate, the alertness that never quite left her posture. She was always scanning, always aware of her surroundings. Can I ask you something? He said finally. You will regardless. Fair point. Malcolm set his bowl aside. Why did you offer to share your tent? We are strangers. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. You seemed like you would not cause trouble. High praise. I shall add it to my letters of reference. He leaned back against the log. In truth, I am grateful. That tent cost me 2 weeks of work, and I am fairly certain it did not simply fail on its own. Her gaze snapped to him. What do you mean? The straps were cut, cleanly, with a sharp blade. Malcolm kept his tone light, conversational. I noticed when I was packing it up. Someone did not want me sleeping comfortably tonight. Who would do that? Excellent question. I have been pondering it myself. He studied her expression, watching for tells. I suppose I might have offended someone without realizing it. I have a gift for that. Lyra's face remained neutral, but her shoulders had tensed slightly. There are thieves at every large campsite. Perhaps someone hoped you would abandon your gear. Perhaps. Malcolm let it drop, though he filed away her reaction. In any case, your timing was fortunate. She nodded and stood, gathering the bowls. We should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long walk. The tent proved as spacious as she had claimed, with room for 2 bedrolls separated by a respectful distance. Lyra had insulated the floor with pine boughs and the walls with spare canvas. The interior held the warmth of the fire they had built near the entrance, and Malcolm had to admit it was significantly more comfortable than his smaller tent would have been, even intact. This is quite civilized, he said, rolling out his blankets. You could rent space. I prefer solitude. Yet here I am, cluttering up your tent. Lyra was already lying down, her back to him. You needed shelter, and you are kinder than you pretend. Malcolm settled into his own bedroll, staring up at the canvas ceiling. Thank you, Lyra. She did not respond, but he thought he saw her shoulders relax slightly. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling through the trees. Malcolm listened to it for a while, his mind turning over the mystery of his sabotaged tent. The cut had been too clean to be accidental, too deliberate to be random vandalism. Someone had wanted him to need help tonight. He glanced across the tent at Lyra's sleeping form, barely visible in the darkness. She had been so quick to offer shelter, so conveniently ready with a solution. But why would she sabotage his tent? What could she possibly gain from sharing her space with a stranger, unless she wanted company, unless she was lonely? Malcolm filed the thought away and closed his eyes. He would watch her tomorrow, see if his suspicions had any merit, and if they did, well. He had been courted in stranger ways. He fell asleep to the sound of wind and Lyra's quiet breathing, and if he dreamed, he did not remember it come morning. They broke camp at dawn, joining the loose procession of travelers heading north toward Crosswater Ridge. The trail wound through mountain passes and thick pine forests, steep in places and treacherous with loose stone. Malcolm kept pace with Lyra, matching her steady, ground-eating stride. She moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to long days on the trail, never wasting energy but never slowing either. "How much weight are you carrying?" he asked as they climbed a particularly steep section. 40 pounds, gear and supplies." Lyra did not sound winded. "You?" "About 30. Tin goods are not as heavy as fur pelts." Malcolm scrambled over a boulder, catching his balance. "Do you always travel alone? Usually it is easier." "Easier how?" She glanced back at him. "No one to slow me down, no one to argue about the route, no one to steal from my pack." "Ah, but you miss out on sparkling conversation and dubious advice." Malcolm grinned at her. "Surely that is worth the inconvenience." "I have not decided yet." They walked in silence for a while, the trail leveling out as it followed a ridgeline. To their left, the mountains fell away into deep valleys thick with autumn color. To their right, more peaks rose in jagged succession, their summits already dusted with early snow. The air was thin and cold, scented with pine resin and distant wood smoke. Malcolm found himself watching Lyra as they walked. She moved with unconscious grace, her attention on the trail but also on everything around them. She noticed things he missed: a deer track in the soft earth, a hawk circling overhead, a shift in the wind that suggested weather coming. She was competent in a way that made him feel slightly useless but also safe. If something went wrong on this trail, she would know what to do. "You are staring," she said without looking at him. "I am admiring your tracking skills. There is a difference." "Is there?" "A subtle one, I admit." Malcolm hopped over a fallen log. "Tell me something about yourself that I would not guess from observation." Lyra considered this for several strides. "I can play the reed pipe. My mother taught me when I was young. Music. I would not have guessed that." Malcolm was genuinely pleased by the revelation. "Do you still play?" "Sometimes. In the evenings when I am alone in my cabin." She adjusted the pack on her shoulders. "It reminds me of her." "Is she still living?" "No, she died 6 years ago, fever." Lyra's voice remained steady, but Malcolm heard the grief underneath. "My father went 2 winters before that." "I am sorry. That is a hard thing." Malcolm let the silence stretch for a moment before adding, "My parents are both alive and deeply disappointed in my career choices. They wanted me to take over the family farm." "Why did you not?" "Because I would have been terrible at it and everyone involved would have been miserable." He shrugged. "I like traveling, I like meeting new people, I like fixing things and moving on before anyone gets too familiar." "That sounds lonely." "So does hunting alone in the mountains for months at a time." Lyra actually smiled at that, a quick flash of expression that transformed her face. "Fair point." They stopped for lunch at a stream crossing, refilling their water skins and eating bread and cheese while sitting on sun-warmed rocks. The other travelers spread out along the trail, some ahead and some behind, but Malcolm and Lyra had fallen into their own rhythm that kept them slightly apart from the main group. "Why the fur trade?" Malcolm asked, tearing off a piece of bread. "You are clearly skilled. You could do other work." "The fur trade pays well, and I enjoy the solitude." Lyra bit into an apple, chewing thoughtfully. "And I am good at it. There is satisfaction in work you do well." "I understand that. There is something deeply pleasing about mending a pot so perfectly that you cannot see the repair." Malcolm stretched out his legs. "Though I admit my real skill is in talking people into things they had not planned to do, like the mayor's daughter." "Exactly like that. She wanted to leave, she just needed someone to tell her it was possible." He tossed a pebble into the stream. "I am good at seeing what people want and giving them permission to reach for it." Lyra looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "That is either a generous gift or a dangerous manipulation. It can be both, I suppose. Intent matters." Malcolm met her eyes. "I try to use it for good. You always succeed." "Not always. But I keep trying." They resumed walking after lunch, the trail descending now into thicker forest. The sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and the air grew warmer as they lost elevation. Malcolm found himself telling Lyra stories from his travels. The time he accidentally started a minor religious schism in a village, by suggesting that pie could be a breakfast food. The merchant who tried to pay him in chickens. The girl who taught him to juggle in exchange for fixing her father's best kettle. Lyra listened with apparent interest, occasionally asking questions but mostly just walking beside him. She was a good audience, attentive without being effusive. Malcolm realized he was performing for her, trying to make her smile again. It was becoming a small obsession. "Your turn," he said finally. "Tell me a story from your travels." "I do not have stories like yours. My work is solitary." "Then tell me about a good hunt, the best one you remember." Lyra was quiet for so long that Malcolm thought she might not answer. Then she began to speak, her voice taking on a different quality, almost like the cadence of the reed pipe music she had mentioned. "3 winters ago, I tracked a silver fox for 5 days through deep snow. It was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen, and its pelt would have been worth enough to live on for 6 months. She paused, stepping over a root. "On the 5th day I found it caught in another hunter's trap. It had been there for hours, maybe longer. It was dying." "Did you take the pelt?" "No. I freed it and carried it back to my cabin. I nursed it for 3 weeks and then I released it." Lyra's expression was distant, remembering. "I never saw it again, and I spent that winter with very little money, but I could not kill something I had saved." Malcolm felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "That is a good story. It is an impractical story. The best ones usually are." They made camp that evening at another communal site, this one smaller and more intimate than the previous nights. There were only 4 other groups of travelers, and everyone kept to themselves, exhausted from the long day's walk. Lyra and Malcolm set up her tent in practice tandem, their movements coordinating without discussion. Malcolm noticed how natural it felt, working alongside her, anticipating what she needed over dinner. He watched her prepare another stew, this time with wild mushrooms she had gathered along the trail. She worked with the same focused efficiency she brought to everything, but Malcolm thought he detected a subtle relaxation in her posture. She was growing comfortable with his presence. "Can I ask you something?" he said as they ate. Lyra glanced up. "You asked that last night too." "You do not need permission." "True, but I find it helps to establish consent before launching into potentially awkward questions." Malcolm set down his bowl. "Why did you really offer to share your tent?" Her whole body went still. "I told you, you needed shelter." "You did." But that does not explain why you cared whether a stranger froze. Malcolm kept his voice gentle, curious rather than accusatory. We had never spoken before. You had no reason to help me. Perhaps I am simply kind. You are kind, but you are also careful, deliberate. He leaned forward slightly. I think you wanted company and you saw an opportunity. Lyra's jaw tightened, her tusks pressing against her lower lip. For a moment, Malcolm thought she might get up and walk away. Then she let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging. Perhaps, she said quietly. Perhaps I have been alone too long. There is no shame in that. There is when you have to trick someone into staying near you. She looked away toward the fire. The other hunters do not camp with orcs. The traders are friendly enough during business, but they do not invite me to their fires. I thought if you needed help you would not refuse. Malcolm absorbed this, feeling the pieces click into place. You sabotaged my tent. It was not a question. Lyra flinched anyway, her hands clenching in her lap. Yes. At noon, when everyone was at the stream washing up. Yes. Her voice was barely audible. I am not proud of it, but you were lonely enough to do it anyway. I was lonely enough to do many things I am not proud of. Lyra finally looked at him, her dark eyes defensive and ashamed in equal measure. If you want to leave, I will understand. I can pay for the damage to your tent. Malcolm sat back, processing this. He should be angry. She had destroyed his property and manipulated him into dependence. It was a violation of trust before trust had even been established. But he found he was not angry. He was something else entirely. How long have you been planning that move? He asked. Lyra blinked, clearly confused by his reaction. What? The tent sabotage. Did you wake up yesterday and decide to try it, or have you been thinking about it for a while? I do not understand what you are asking. I am asking whether I was specifically targeted, or whether I was just convenient. Malcolm picked up a stick and poked at the fire. Because if you have been carrying a knife around various campsites, waiting for the right lonely traveler to quietly ruin, that suggests a level of premeditation that concerns me. You are not angry. Oh, I am several things, but anger is not currently topping the list. He glanced at her. You destroyed my property because you were desperate for connection. That is either pathetic or romantic, and I have not decided which yet. Lyra looked utterly lost. Most people would be furious. Most people are boring. Malcolm tossed the stick into the fire and watched it catch. Here is the thing, Lyra. I like you. I have enjoyed the last 2 days more than I have enjoyed most of my recent travels. You are competent and interesting, and you tell good stories. I would have walked with you and shared your camp regardless of the tense situation. You do not know that. I strongly suspect it. He met her eyes across the fire. But the trick bothers me not because you did it, but because you thought you had to. What does it say about the world we live in that a kind, skilled woman believes she has to sabotage a stranger's gear to earn companionship? It says that orcs are not welcome among humans. It says that humans are idiots. Malcolm shook his head. And it says that you have been hurt enough times to lose faith in asking directly for what you want. Lyra stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly her eyes began to shine with unshed tears. She blinked them away angrily, swiping at her face with the back of her hand. I do not cry, she said harshly. Everyone cries sometimes. I do not. But her voice cracked on the words, and Malcolm felt his heart break a little. He stood and moved around the fire, settling onto the log beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. Lyra sat rigid, her hands fisted in her lap, radiating misery and shame. I am not angry, Malcolm said quietly, but I need you to understand something. If we are going to continue traveling together, and I very much hope we will, then you need to ask for what you want, directly, no tricks. I do not know how, you learn, you practice. He risked putting a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension in her muscles. "Start now. What do you want?" Lyra was silent for a long time. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, "I want you to stay in my tent for the rest of the journey. I want someone to talk to in the evenings. I want to not be alone. Then I will stay and we will talk and you will not be alone." Malcolm squeezed her shoulder gently. "See, that was not so hard. It was terrifying. Most worthwhile things are." He released her shoulder and leaned back, giving her space. "For what it is worth, I want those things too. I have been alone in crowds for so long that I forgot what actual connection felt like. You reminded me." Lyra turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "You mean that?" "I mean that." She nodded slowly, something easing in her expression. They sat together in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Around them, the camp settled into sleep. Malcolm felt the weight of the day in his bones, the good exhaustion that came from miles walked and honest work done. "We should sleep," Lyra said eventually. "Tomorrow is longer than today." They prepared for bed in the tent, the routine already familiar. Malcolm noticed that Lyra positioned her bedroll slightly closer to his than she had the previous night, closing the gap between them by a few inches. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. "Lyra," he said into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for telling me the truth. Thank you for not leaving." Malcolm smiled, though she could not see it. "I am not going anywhere." The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as if they had been walking this trail together for years rather than days. Malcolm and Lyra rose at dawn, broke camp efficiently, and walked north through changing terrain. The mountains gave way to rolling foothills, and the foothills descended into wider valleys where farms dotted the landscape. The weather held clear and cold, perfect for traveling. They talked constantly. Malcolm discovered that Lyra had strong opinions about everything from the proper way to skin a rabbit to the best season for traveling through the northern territories. She was not, as he had initially assumed, quiet by nature. She was simply selective about who deserved her words. Having decided that Malcolm qualified, she opened up with surprising depth. "My mother used to say that words are like arrows," she told him as they walked through a grove of aspen, the golden leaves shimmering overhead. "Once you loose them, you cannot call them back, so you should aim carefully." My mother said something similar, though with less poetry. It was mostly just shout at me for talking too much at dinner. Malcolm hopped over a puddle. "Do you think words are like arrows?" "I think words are like many things. Arrows, yes, but also bridges, and sometimes shields." Lyra tilted her head, considering. "It depends on how you use them." "What are they for you right now?" "Bridges, I think, reaching across to you." Malcolm felt that warmth in his chest again, the one that appeared more and more frequently around Lyra. "Then I am glad to meet you halfway." On the 4th day of their journey together, they encountered their first real difficulty. The trail crossed a river at a ford that was usually shallow enough to wade, but autumn rains upstream had swollen the current to a dangerous level. A group of travelers stood on the bank, arguing about the best way to cross. Lyra studied the water with narrowed eyes, reading the current like text. "The ford is too deep. We need to find another way." "How far to the next crossing?" Malcolm asked. 6 miles east." "It will add half a day to our journey." She glanced at the other travelers. "Some of them will try to cross here anyway. They will lose gear, possibly their lives." "Can we convince them otherwise?" Lyra's expression suggested she doubted it, but they approached the group anyway. The lead traveler, a stocky human man with a merchant's fine cloak, barely glanced at Lyra before dismissing her. "The orc thinks we should turn back," he announced to the others with a sneer. "Probably trying to slow us down so she can rob us on the trail." Malcolm felt his temper flare. The orc has a name, and she has more experience in these mountains than you and your friends combined. Easy for you to say, boy. You are not carrying 300 pounds of trade goods. The merchant gestured at his 2-pack horses. I am crossing here, and anyone with sense will follow. Anyone with sense will go to the eastern ford. Lyra's voice was flat, controlled. But do what you want. I will not risk my life for your impatience. The merchant spat in the dirt near her feet. Malcolm moved before he thought, putting himself between them with his hand on the knife at his belt. Apologize, he said quietly, or what? You will fight me over an orc. The merchant laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. You are either brave or stupid. I have been told I am both. Malcolm did not move. Apologize. The standoff lasted 10 seconds before the merchant stepped back, muttering something about fools and orc lovers. He turned to his companions and announced they would cross immediately, taking the southern route along the bank to find a better approach. Malcolm watched them go, his heart pounding with residual anger. Lyra touched his elbow gently. You did not need to do that, she said. Yes, I did. He was a coward and a bigot. Malcolm turned to face her. Are you all right? I am used to it. That does not make it acceptable. He realized he was still holding his knife and forced himself to relax, returning it to its sheath. Let us go find that eastern ford. They walked along the river for the next 3 hours, finally finding a place where the water ran shallow over a bed of smooth stones. Lyra tested the current carefully before declaring it safe, and they crossed without incident. By the time they reached the far bank, Malcolm's legs ached from fighting the cold water, but they were both intact and dry from the waist up. Thank you, Lyra said as they wrung out their socks and boots, for standing up for me. It was nothing. It was not nothing. Most people would have stayed silent. She pulled on her boots and began lacing them with quick, efficient movements. Most people do stay silent. Malcolm did not know what to say to that, so he just reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. She squeezed back, her grip strong and warm, and they continued on in comfortable silence. That evening, they made camp alone for the first time, having pulled ahead of the other travelers by taking the eastern route. Lyra found a sheltered hollow beside a creek, protected from the wind by a stand of cedar trees. They set up the tent as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the air growing cold enough to frost. I am glad we are alone, Malcolm admitted as they built the fire. The communal camps were beginning to exhaust me. Too many people staring. Too many people staring at you and pretending they were not. He arranged kindling in a careful pyramid. It made me want to punch several of them. Violence is not the answer to prejudice. Perhaps not, but it is deeply satisfying in the moment. Malcolm struck sparks from his flint, nursing the flame to life. How do you stand it? The constant hostility. Lyra was quiet for a while, preparing their dinner with practiced efficiency. I remind myself that their opinions do not define me. I know my own worth. That is remarkably healthy. I usually just hold grudges and plot elaborate revenge. I did not say I was always healthy about it. She actually grinned at him. Last winter, a trader cheated me on a fox pelt. I may have left a dead skunk under his wagon. Malcolm burst out laughing. You did not. I did. He deserved it. That is brilliant. Petty, childish, and absolutely brilliant. He accepted the bowl of stew she handed him. I am learning so much about you, Lyra Calloway. You are a woman of hidden depths. Most people never bother to look for them. Their loss. Malcolm ate a spoonful of stew, savoring the rich flavor. You are an excellent cook, you know. I am going to be spoiled for camp food after this. Then I will have to keep cooking for you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lyra seemed to realize what she had said and looked away quickly, her green skin darkening with what might have been a blush. "I mean, if you want," she added awkwardly. "I am not assuming we will continue traveling together after Crosswater Ridge. Why would we not?" "Because you have your own life, your own plans." Lyra poked at the fire with a stick. "I have enjoyed this week, but I am not naive. I know it is temporary." Malcolm set down his bowl and leaned forward, waiting until she met his eyes. "What if I do not want it to be temporary?" "What do you mean?" "I mean I have been thinking about the future, and all my thoughts include you in them." He took a breath, trying to find the right words. "I like you, Lyra. I like traveling with you. I like talking to you. I like the person I am when I am around you. I do not want that to end when we reach the ridge." Lyra stared at him, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are kind and strong and funny in a quiet way that sneaks up on me. I know you saved a fox you spent days hunting because you could not bear to let it die. I know you sabotaged my tent because you were lonely, and then you were brave enough to admit it." Malcolm reached across the fire and took her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers. "I know I have not been this happy in years." "Malcolm," her voice cracked on his name, "I am an orc, you are human. This is not simple. Nothing worthwhile ever is. People will judge us. They already do. Let them. I stopped caring about other people's opinions around the same time I left home." He rubbed his thumb across her knuckles. "The only opinion that matters to me is yours, so I am asking directly with no tricks and no sabotage. Do you want me to stay? After the ridge, after the market, do you want me to come back with you to your cabin?" Lyra's eyes were bright with tears again, but this time she did not try to hide them. "Yes, I want that very much." "Then that is what we will do." She made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and then she was moving around the fire, pulling him into an embrace that knocked the breath from his lungs. Malcolm wrapped his arms around her, feeling the strength in her body, the warmth of her against the cold evening air. She smelled like pine smoke and leather, and the herbs she used in cooking, and he thought he could happily smell nothing else for the rest of his life. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered against his shoulder. "Neither do I. We will figure it out together." They held each other as the fire burned low and the stars appeared overhead, bright and cold in the mountain sky. Malcolm felt something settle in his chest, a rightness that he had been missing without even knowing it. This woman, this moment, this decision. It all felt inevitable, as if every step of his wandering life had been leading him here. Eventually they pulled apart, but only far enough to sit side by side, Lyra's head resting on Malcolm's shoulder and his arm around her waist. They stayed like that until the fire died to embers and the cold drove them into the tent, where they lay in their separate bedrolls but closer than before, their hands clasped in the space between. "Malcolm," Lyra's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes, I am glad I sabotaged your tent." He laughed quietly. "I am too, though next time just ask me to stay. It will save us both some trouble." "I will remember that." They fell asleep to the sound of the creek and the wind in the cedars, and Malcolm dreamed of a small cabin in the mountains where smoke rose from the chimney and green fields stretched toward distant peaks. The final 2 days to Crosswater Ridge passed in a blur of cold weather and easy companionship. Malcolm and Lyra walked side by side, their conversation ranging from profound to silly and back again. They shared their histories in the way that new lovers do, excavating the past for clues about who they had become. Malcolm learned that Lyra had grown up in a small orc community in the northern mountains, one of the few stable settlements that humans tolerated. Her father had been a craftsman, making tools and weapons, while her mother had been a healer and musician. They had taught her to be proud of her heritage while also being realistic about the prejudice she would face. "They wanted me to be strong but not bitter," she said as they climbed a steep switchback. "It was a difficult balance. Did you achieve it?" "Most days. Some days I am very bitter." Lyra glanced at him. "But meeting you has helped. I have that effect on people. I am a delight." "You are a fool. A delightful fool." She pushed him gently, and he staggered in mock offense, making her laugh. The sound was becoming more frequent, and Malcolm treasured each occurrence like a miser hoarding gold. He told her about his childhood on the farm, the endless chores, and the feeling of being trapped in a life that did not fit him. His parents had been good people, but they had never understood his restlessness, his need to see what lay beyond the next hill. "I think they still hope I will come home," he admitted. "Every letter my mother includes news about farms for sale, good land at reasonable prices. She does not understand that I have no interest in owning land." "What do you want to own?" Malcolm thought about it. "Nothing, really. Or maybe just my own choices, the freedom to go where I want and do what interests me." "And now, do you still want that freedom?" "I want freedom with you. I want to choose you every day and have you choose me back." He caught her hand and pulled her to a stop, turning her to face him. "That is not a cage, Lyra. That is something else entirely." She smiled at him, and in that moment, with the autumn sun on her face and her eyes warm with affection, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I choose you," she said simply. "Today and tomorrow and every day after." "Then we are agreed." Malcolm kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that made her close her eyes. "We are stupidly, recklessly choosing each other despite all logic and reason." "That sounds right." They reached Crosswater Ridge on the afternoon of the 7th day, as the sun slanted golden through the valley. The town sprawled along the confluence of two rivers, its streets packed with travelers and traders who had come for the autumn market. Brightly colored tents filled the central square, merchants hawking everything from spices to weapons to bolts of fine cloth. The air smelled like roasting meat and fresh bread, underlaid with the rich, earthy scent of livestock. Malcolm and Lyra made their way through the crowds, sticking close together. Malcolm noticed the stares that followed them, the way people's eyes lingered on Lyra and then flicked to him with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. He met each gaze with a bland smile, his hand resting protectively on the small of Lyra's back. "You do not have to guard me," she murmured. "I can handle a few stares." "I know you can. But I want to make it clear that you are with me, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. My fierce protector. I do what I can." They found space at an inn near the market square, a ramshackle building that rented rooms by the night and asked no questions about its guests. The innkeeper, a weathered woman with shrewd eyes, looked Lyra up and down before quoting them a price that was only slightly inflated. "We will take it," Malcolm said, counting out coins, "and if you could direct us to the market master, we would appreciate it. Square tent, red banner, cannot miss it." The innkeeper handed him a key. "Room is upstairs, third door on the left. No fighting, no fires, and you pay for anything you break. Understood?" The room was small and sparsely furnished, but it had a real bed and a window that overlooked the market. Lyra dropped her pack with a sigh of relief, rolling her shoulders to work out the stiffness. "A week of walking," she said. "I will not miss sleeping on the ground." "Agreed, though your tent made it bearable." Malcolm sat on the edge of the bed, testing the mattress. "This is an improvement, though." Lyra joined him, sitting close enough that their thighs touched. They had been growing more physically comfortable with each other over the past few days, small touches and casual contact that spoke of building intimacy. Malcolm found himself acutely aware of her nearness, the warmth of her body, the way her hand rested on the bed near his. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we sell our goods, enjoy the market, and then we go home." Malcolm covered her hand with his. "To your cabin, if that is still what you want." "It is what I want, but are you certain?" Lyra turned to face him fully. "You would be giving up your traveling life. Living in one place with me in the mountains. It is different from what you are used to. I am certain." Malcolm lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "I have been wandering for years, looking for something without knowing what it was. I found it. I found you." "Malcolm Zeller, you are far too romantic for a tinker." "I contain multitudes," he grinned at her. "Besides, I can still travel for trade. I can go to markets and sell my goods. I just come home to you at the end." "Home," Lyra repeated softly, as if testing the word. "I have not thought of my cabin as home in a long time. It was just a place I stayed between hunts. Then we will make it a home together." She kissed him then, a sudden decisive movement that brought her mouth to his. Malcolm made a surprised sound against her lips before melting into the kiss, his hand coming up to cup the back of her head. She tasted like the honey candy they had bought from a vendor earlier, sweet and rich. The kiss was tentative at first, exploratory, and then deeper as they learned each other's rhythms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Lyra's eyes were dark with emotion. "I have wanted to do that for days," she admitted. "You should have asked. I am very amenable to kissing." Malcolm traced his thumb along her jaw, marveling at the smoothness of her skin. "You can do it again if you like. I like." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment. Malcolm felt desire unfurl in his gut, warm and insistent, but he kept it banked. They had time. They had all the time in the world now. Eventually, they pulled apart and spent the afternoon at the market. Malcolm set up a small stall with his tinware, calling out to passers-by with the easy charm that made him a good salesman. Lyra disappeared into the crowd with her bundle of pelts, heading for the furriers section where the serious trading happened. They reunited at dinner, meeting at a tavern that served roasted chicken and root vegetables. Malcolm had made a decent profit on his goods, enough to restock his supplies and have coin left over. Lyra had done even better. The quality of her pelts commanded top prices, and the furriers had competed for her business. "Enough to get through the winter comfortably," she said, accepting a mug of ale from the serving girl, "and to buy some luxuries." "What luxuries do you have in mind?" "Glass windows for the cabin. I have been wanting them for years." Lyra's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "And proper wool blankets. And maybe a new cooking pot. Practical luxuries. I approve." Malcolm raised his mug. "To successful trades and warm cabins. To new beginnings." Lyra clinked her mug against his. They drank and ate and talked, the tavern warm and noisy around them. Malcolm noticed that several people were staring at them, and not all of the attention was friendly. A group of young men at a nearby table kept glancing over, their expressions ugly with drink and prejudice. "Trouble," Lyra murmured, following his gaze. "Maybe. Stay alert." The trouble materialized as they were leaving, one of the young men stepping into their path with a sneer on his face. "Saw you with the orc at the market," he said to Malcolm. "Thought you should know she probably stole those furs. Orcs are all thieves. She trapped them herself over months of work." Malcolm kept his voice level. "Now move aside." "Or what? You will defend your orc whore." The man's friends laughed, emboldened by alcohol and malice. Malcolm felt Lyra tense beside him, but before either of them could respond, the tavern keeper appeared from behind them with a cudgel in his hand. "Out," he said flatly to the troublemakers. "All of you. I do not allow that kind of talk in my establishment." "We are paying customers," one of them protested. "You were paying customers. Now you are banned." The tavern keeper was a large man with scarred knuckles and the look of someone who had broken up more than his share of fights. "Get out before I help you out." The young men left, muttering threats and insults, but they left. The tavern keeper turned to Malcolm and Lyra with an apologetic expression. "Sorry about that. We get all types during market season, and not all of them have manners." He nodded to Lyra. "Your money is as good as anyone's here, miss. You are welcome any time." "Thank you," Lyra said quietly. "No thanks needed. I just run a decent place." The tavern keeper returned to his bar, and the normal noise of the tavern resumed. Malcolm let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. That could have gone worse. It usually does. Lyra was already moving toward the door. "We should go." They walked back to the inn in silence, both on edge. Malcolm kept scanning the streets for signs of the troublemakers, but they seemed to have dispersed. Still, he did not relax until they were safely in their room with the door barred. "Are you all right?" he asked as Lyra sat heavily on the bed. "I am fine. I told you I am used to it." "I hate that you are used to it." Malcolm knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "You should not have to tolerate that kind of hatred. But I do. We do." She met his eyes, her expression serious. "This is what life will be like, Malcolm. Stares and insults and people trying to start fights. Every town, every market. It will not stop just because we want it to. I know. And you still want this, want me, more than anything." Malcolm squeezed her hands. "I am not naive, Lyra. I know what we are choosing, and I choose it anyway because you are worth it." She pulled him up onto the bed, into her arms, holding him tightly. Malcolm wrapped himself around her, offering what comfort he could. They stayed like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other. "I love you," Lyra whispered against his hair. "I did not mean to, but I do." Malcolm's heart soared. "I love you too, have for days now." "Why did you not say?" "I was waiting for the right moment. This seems right." She laughed, a watery sound, and kissed him again. This kiss was different from the earlier ones, deeper and more urgent, flavored with the day's fear and the relief of safety. Malcolm responded in kind, his hands sliding under her tunic to find warm skin. Lyra made a soft sound of pleasure and pulled him closer, and they tumbled together into the bed's softness. They made love that night with the tenderness of people learning each other for the first time, exploring and discovering what brought pleasure, what made the other gasp or sigh. Malcolm had been with other women, but none of them had felt like this, like coming home to a place he had never been. Lyra was strong and gentle in turns, confident in some ways and shy in others, and he loved every contradiction. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the blankets, the room lit only by moonlight through the window. Malcolm traced idle patterns on Lyra's shoulder, feeling her heart beat slow against his chest. "I want to give you something," he said softly. "You have given me plenty." "Not this." Malcolm reached for his pack beside the bed, fumbling in the darkness until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth and pressed it into Lyra's hand. She sat up, curious, and unwrapped it carefully. In the moonlight, Malcolm could see her face transform as she recognized what she held. A small tin music box, cunningly made, with a reed pipe melody etched into its mechanism. "You made this," she breathed. "I have been working on it for the past 3 days, whenever we stopped to rest. I remembered what you said about your mother and the reed pipe." Malcolm felt suddenly nervous. "If you turn the crank on the side, it plays." Lyra did, and the tent filled with a delicate, tinkling melody. It was simple but lovely, and Malcolm saw tears spill down her cheeks as she listened. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Malcolm, this is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. You deserve kind things. You deserve all the kind things." He wiped away her tears with his thumb. "I want to spend my life giving them to you. You foolish, romantic man." She set the music box carefully aside and pulled him back down to the bed, kissing him between words. "I love you. I love you. I love you." "I love you too," Malcolm said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They spent 2 more days at Crosswater Ridge, enjoying the market and each other's company. Malcolm bought gifts for Lyra: the glass windows she wanted, thick wool blankets, a new cooking pot with a lid that fit perfectly. Lyra bought Malcolm a proper winter cloak lined with rabbit fur, insisting that his current one was too thin for mountain winters. "You will freeze in my cabin with that," she said, wrapping the new cloak around his shoulders. "This is better. It is too expensive. I can afford it. And you are worth it." She adjusted the collar, her fingers lingering on his neck. "I want you warm." They explored the town together, hand in hand, ignoring the stares and occasional hostile mutters. Malcolm found that he cared less and less about other people's opinions. Let them stare. Let them judge. He had found something rare and precious, and their narrow minds could not diminish it. On their last evening at the ridge, they climbed to a hilltop overlooking the town and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The market spread out below them, its lights beginning to twinkle as merchants lit lanterns and cook fires. "I am going to miss this," Malcolm said. "The markets, the crowds, the constant movement. We can come back every year if you want." Lyra leaned against him. "The autumn market is always the biggest. We can trade and sell and then go home." "Home." Malcolm tested the word, finding it fit perfectly. "Yes, that sounds right. Are you nervous about living in the mountains?" "A little, but mostly I am excited." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "Lyra Calloway, I am about to embark on the greatest adventure of my life, and I am doing it with you. How could I be anything but excited?" She smiled at him, that full, radiant smile that transformed her face. "When did you become such a poet?" "Around the same time I fell in love with an orc woman who sabotages tents." Malcolm pulled her closer. "It brings out my romantic side. I will never live that down, will I? Never. I am going to tell our grandchildren about it." Lyra froze. "Grandchildren, eventually. Assuming we have children first, which seems like the logical order of things." Malcolm realized what he had said and felt his face heat. "I mean, if you want, I am not assuming. We should probably discuss this." "We should." But Lyra was smiling, her eyes bright. "Later, we have time. All the time in the world." They kissed as the sun slipped below the horizon, and Malcolm thought he had never been happier in his entire life. They left Crosswater Ridge at dawn the next morning, their packs heavy with purchases and supplies. The journey back to Lyra's cabin would take 5 days, retracing part of their route before branching east into the deeper mountains. Malcolm felt a flutter of anticipation in his chest. He was going to see where Lyra lived, the place that would become their home. The weather cooperated for the first 3 days, clear and cold but not unbearable. They made good time, falling back into the easy rhythm of walking side by side, talking or maintaining comfortable silence as the mood took them. At night, they shared the tent and each other's warmth, making love quietly and falling asleep wrapped together. On the 4th day, the weather turned. Clouds rolled in from the north, heavy and gray, and by afternoon it was snowing. Not the gentle, picturesque snow of children's stories, but driving, horizontal snow that stung exposed skin and made visibility nearly impossible. "We need to find shelter," Lyra shouted over the wind. "There is a cave system about a mile east. If we can reach it, we can wait out the storm." "Lead the way," Malcolm shouted back. They fought through the snow for what felt like hours but was probably less than one. Malcolm lost feeling in his fingers and toes, his whole body shaking with cold. He focused on Lyra's back, trusting her to know where she was going. She moved with determination, her head down against the wind, and he followed. The cave mouth appeared suddenly, a dark opening in a cliff face that offered blessed relief from the wind. They stumbled inside, gasping, and Lyra immediately began gathering dead wood that had blown into the cave's entrance. "Fire," she said through chattering teeth. "We need fire now." Malcolm's hands were shaking too badly to work his flint, so Lyra took over, striking sparks with steady determination until the kindling caught. The fire grew, slowly pushing back the cold, and they huddled close to it, trying to get warm. "That was close," Malcolm managed when he could speak again. "Too close. I should have seen the storm coming sooner." Lyra looked angry with herself. "I am better than that. You got us to shelter, that is what matters." Malcolm reached for her hand. "Are you all right, cold but alive?" She squeezed his hand. "You?" "Same." They spent the next hour building up the fire and setting up the tent deeper in the cave, creating a sheltered space that would hold warmth. The storm raged outside, but inside the cave they were safe. Malcolm felt his body slowly thaw, the painful tingling of returning circulation in his extremities. "How long will the storm last?" he asked as Lyra prepared tea from their supplies. "Could be hours, could be days." She handed him a steaming cup. "We have enough food for 3 days if we are careful. Then we will be careful." The storm lasted 2 days. 2 days of being confined to the cave, rationing food and water, keeping the fire going with carefully managed fuel. It should have been miserable, but Malcolm found himself oddly content. He had Lyra, he had shelter, and he had time to simply be present with the woman he loved. They talked endlessly, sharing stories and dreams. Lyra told him about her plans for expanding the cabin, maybe building a workshop where Malcolm could practice his tinker's trade. Malcolm described the kind of life he wanted them to build together, one that balanced solitude with community, independence with connection. "I want to know your neighbors," he said on the second day, as they lay together in the tent. "I want to be part of whatever community exists up here." There are a few other homesteads within a day's walk. A family of humans, an elderly orc couple, a widow who raises goats. Lyra traced patterns on his chest. "They are good people, they will accept you." "Will they accept us together?" "Some will, some will not." She was quiet for a moment. "The orc couple will be happy for me. They have been telling me for years that I need to find someone. Smart people. They are. You will like them." The storm finally broke on the third morning, the wind dying and the snow tapering to flurries. They packed up carefully and emerged from the cave into a transformed world. Everything was blanketed in white, the trees heavy with snow, the landscape pristine and beautiful. "It is gorgeous," Malcolm breathed. "It is deadly if you do not respect it." But Lyra was smiling. "Come on. We are only a day from home now." They walked through the snow, their pace slower due to the depth, but steady. Malcolm's excitement grew with every mile. He was going to see Lyra's cabin, the place she had built with her own hands, the place they would make into a home together. The cabin appeared in late afternoon, a sturdy log structure nestled in a small valley surrounded by pine forest. Smoke rose from the chimney, which confused Malcolm until he remembered that Lyra had left a banking fire when she departed for the market. "It is perfect," he said, stopping to take it all in. "Lyra, it is perfect. It is small, 1 room basically." But she sounded pleased. "We can expand it, add a workshop for you, and maybe a second bedroom eventually. For children, she glanced at him, "if we want them." "I want them. With you, I want everything." They approached the cabin together, and Lyra opened the door with a key she wore on a cord around her neck. The interior was dim but warm, the fire still smoldering in the hearth. Malcolm could see the care Lyra had put into the space. Handmade furniture, furs on the floor, shelves lined with tools and supplies. It was simple but comfortable, a reflection of its owner. "Welcome home," Lyra said softly. Malcolm dropped his pack and pulled her into his arms. "Thank you for bringing me here, for letting me stay. Thank you for wanting to stay." They kissed in the doorway of the cabin, and Malcolm felt something settle into place in his soul. This was right. This was where he belonged. The next weeks passed in a blur of settling in and preparing for winter. Malcolm threw himself into making the cabin feel like their home rather than just Lyra's space. He built new shelves, repaired the roof where it had started to leak, and set up a small workshop in the corner where he could practice his trade. Lyra introduced him to her neighbors, and Malcolm found the reception mixed but mostly positive. The elderly Orc couple, Thorna and Gavril, welcomed him with open arms and many questions. The human family, the Harpers, were more reserved but polite. The widow with goats, a weather-beaten woman named Elsa, took one look at him and Lyra together and announced that it was about time someone made Lyra happy. "She has been alone too long," Elsa said bluntly. "Glad you have some sense." Malcolm helped where he could, mending pots and tools for the neighbors, earning their trust slowly. He learned the rhythms of mountain life, the early mornings and long work days, the careful management of resources, the importance of community in harsh conditions. It was different from anything he had known, but he found he loved it. Winter set in hard and fast, burying the valley in snow and ice. Malcolm and Lyra spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and making love. She taught him to play the reed pipe, laughing at his clumsy attempts. He taught her to juggle, which she mastered with annoying speed. "You are naturally coordinated," he complained after she successfully juggled 3 pine cones while he dropped his repeatedly. "Or you are naturally clumsy. That is also possible." On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Malcolm woke before dawn and slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to disturb Lyra. He had been working on something for weeks, a surprise he hoped she would like. He built up the fire and set a pot of tea to steep, then retrieved the object he had hidden in his workshop. It was a wooden box, carefully carved and fitted, with a reed pipe melody etched into the lid. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was a simple ring made of braided silver wire. Malcolm was not sure what Orc traditions looked like for proposals, and he did not have the money for an elaborate ceremony. But he had his skills, his love, and his commitment. It would have to be enough. Lyra emerged from the bedroom as the sun rose, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. She wore one of his shirts as a nightgown, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked sleep soft and beautiful. "Good morning," she said, moving to the fire. "Good morning." Malcolm's heart was pounding. "I made tea. I can smell it." She poured herself a cup and sat at the table. "You are up early. I could not sleep. Nightmares. No, anticipation." Malcolm took a breath and pulled the box from behind his back. "I made you something." Lyra set down her tea, her eyes widening as she recognized the box. "Malcolm, what is this? Open it and see." She did, her hands trembling slightly. When she saw the ring, she made a small sound, almost a gasp. "Lyra Calloway," Malcolm said, dropping to one knee in front of her. "I know we have only known each other for a few months. I know this is fast and probably inadvisable by any reasonable standard. But I love you, and I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a home here, raise children if we are lucky, grow old together in this valley. So I am asking, with no tricks and no sabotage, just honest affection and hope. Will you marry me?" Lyra was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling. "You foolish, wonderful man. Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." She pulled him up and kissed him fiercely. "Yes, I will marry you. 1,000 times yes." Malcolm slipped the ring onto her finger, his own hands shaking now. It fit perfectly, the braided silver bright against her green skin. Lyra held up her hand, admiring it, and then pulled him into another kiss. "When?" she asked when they finally pulled apart. "When do you want to marry?" "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next week, next spring. I am flexible." "Spring," Lyra decided. "When the snow melts and we can have a proper ceremony. I want to invite the neighbors, have a feast. I want to celebrate." "Then spring it is." They spent the rest of the winter planning their wedding, a simple affair that would take place at the cabin with their small community in attendance. Elsa offered to provide the food, the Harper family promised to bring music, and Thorna and Gavril insisted on officiating since they were the eldest in the valley. "It is traditional," Thorna explained, her tusks gleaming in the firelight. "The eldest speak the blessings, bind the couple." "We would be honored," Lyra said. Malcolm threw himself into preparing for the ceremony. He wanted everything to be perfect for Lyra, wanted to give her a day she would remember forever. He carved decorations from wood, fixed up the cabin until it gleamed, and practiced his vows until he had them memorized. On a warm day in early spring, when the snow had melted enough to reveal green grass, and the first wildflowers were blooming, Malcolm Zeller and Lyra Calloway were married in the clearing beside their cabin. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, with Thorna and Gavril speaking the traditional blessings in a mixture of common and Orcish. Malcolm understood perhaps half of it, but he felt the weight of the words, the sacredness of the promises they were making. When it came time for vows, Lyra spoke first, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Malcolm Zeller, you came into my life when I had given up on connection. You saw me, truly saw me, not as an orc or a hunter but as a person worthy of love. You chose me despite all the reasons you should not have, and you keep choosing me every day. I promise to choose you back, to be your partner and your home, to love you through all the seasons of our life together. This I vow." Malcolm had to clear his throat before he could speak, his own eyes stinging. "Lyra Calloway, you are the bravest person I have ever met. Not because you face down prejudice and hardship, though you do that with remarkable grace, but because you were brave enough to let me in, to trust me with your heart after you had been given every reason not to trust humans. You taught me what it means to have a home, not a place but a person. I promise to be worthy of that trust, to stand beside you, to build a life that honors both of us. This I vow." Thorna pronounced them married, and their small gathering erupted in cheers. Malcolm kissed his wife for the first time, tasting salt from her tears and his own, and felt joy flood through him like sunlight. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing. Malcolm danced with Lyra under the stars, her body warm and solid in his arms, and thought he had never been happier. "No regrets?" Lyra asked as they swayed to a slow song. "Not a single one." Malcolm kissed her forehead. "You, only that I did not sabotage your tent sooner." He laughed, delighted by her. "You are never going to let that go either, are you?" "Never. It is part of our story now. Fair enough. We can tell our grandchildren about it." "Grandchildren?" Lyra's eyes sparkled. "You keep mentioning those." "I am optimistic about our future." "So am I." They danced until the fire burned low and their guests began to depart, calling out final congratulations as they headed home. Malcolm and Lyra stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching the last of them disappear into the forest, then turned to each other. "Husband," Lyra said, testing the word. "Wife," Malcolm replied, grinning. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." They went inside together, closing the door on the spring night, and Malcolm knew with absolute certainty that this was where he was meant to be, not wandering anymore, but home. Finally, wonderfully, home. The years that followed were good ones. Malcolm and Lyra built a life together in the mountain valley, expanding the cabin and their small farm. Malcolm's tinker business grew as word spread of his skills, and he made regular trips to nearby towns to trade. Lyra continued hunting, her reputation ensuring steady demand for her pelts. Their first child, a son they named Quentin, arrived 2 years after their wedding on a snowy December night. Malcolm held him for the first time with shaking hands, marveling at the tiny, perfect person they had created. Quentin had his father's brown hair and his mother's green skin, a beautiful blend of both their heritages. "He is perfect," Malcolm whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He is ours," Lyra said, exhausted but radiant. Quentin was followed by a second son, Rhys, 3 years later. Rhys inherited Malcolm's light build and Lyra's dark eyes, and from the moment he could walk, he was constantly in motion. Where Quentin was quiet and thoughtful, Rhys was loud and adventurous, keeping his parents on constant alert. "He is going to be the death of me," Malcolm said one afternoon, pulling Rhys down from a tree he had climbed despite explicit instructions not to. "He is 5. He is supposed to be wild." Lyra scooped up their son and kissed his forehead. "You were probably the same at his age." "My mother confirms this. She says it is karmic justice." They raised their sons with love and discipline, teaching them to be proud of both sides of their heritage. Malcolm and Lyra were honest about the prejudice they would face, preparing the boys without frightening them. They emphasized community and kindness, showing by example how to meet hate with dignity. The Valley community embraced the growing family. Thorna and Gavril became honorary grandparents, always ready with advice or babysitting. The Harper children grew up alongside Quentin and Rhys, playmates and friends. Even as the world beyond the valley remained complicated, the small corner they had carved out stayed safe and welcoming. On their 10th anniversary, Malcolm and Lyra sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching Quentin and Rhys play in the meadow. The evening was warm, fireflies drifting through the grass, and Malcolm felt profound contentment settle over him. 10 years, he said, taking Lyra's hand. "A decade of marriage. Best decade of my life," Lyra said, leaning against him. "Mine too." Malcolm kissed her temple. "Do you remember that first night, when you offered me your tent? I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish to accept help from an orc." Lyra smiled. "I still have not decided which. Both, probably." Malcolm squeezed her hand. "I am glad you sabotaged my tent. I am glad you forgave me for it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, and Malcolm thought about the improbable chain of events that had led him here. A cut tent strap, an offered shelter, a journey north through the mountains. It had seemed like coincidence at the time, but looking back, it felt like fate, not destiny in some grand cosmic sense. Just the small, imperfect choices that people make when they are lonely and hopeful and brave enough to reach for connection. Lyra reaching for him across a campsite, cutting his tent because she could not bear to ask for company. Him accepting her offer, trusting an orc woman he did not know. Both of them choosing over and over to be vulnerable and honest with each other. "What are you thinking about?" Lyra asked. "Tent sabotage and lucky coincidences." Malcolm turned to face her. "And how grateful I am for both. Sentimental fool. You're sentimental fool." "Mine," Lyra agreed, and kissed him as the sun set behind the mountains and their children's laughter rang through the valley. They had built something beautiful together, something worth every stare and insult and challenge they had faced. A home, a family, a life that honored both of them fully. It had started with a simple offer on a cold night, and grown into something neither of them could have imagined alone. Malcolm thought about the tinker he had been before meeting Lyra, wandering from town to town with no anchor and no direction. That man seemed like a stranger now. He had been transformed by love, by commitment, by the daily choice to show up for someone else. And Lyra, who had lived alone in the mountains for so long that she forgot how to ask for what she wanted, had learned to trust again. To be vulnerable, to let someone in, to build a life that included another person's dreams alongside her own. "I love you," Malcolm said, the words as natural as breathing. "I love you too," Lyra replied, and in those simple words was everything they had built and everything they would become. As night fell and the stars emerged overhead, they called their sons inside for dinner. The four of them gathering around the table Malcolm had built with his own hands. They ate and talked and laughed, a family bound by love and choice. And when Malcolm looked at Lyra across the table, he saw his entire future reflected in her eyes. Years from now, when their children were grown and they were old together, he would still remember this moment. The warmth of their home, the sound of their sons' voices, the feeling of Lyra's hand in his. All of it beginning with a sabotaged tent and an offer of shelter on a cold autumn night. "My tent's warmer," she had said, and she had been right. Not just the physical tent, but the warmth of her presence, her love, her unwavering commitment. She had offered him shelter from more than just the cold. She had offered him a home, and he had been wise enough to accept. Malcolm raised his glass of cider in a small, private toast, and when Lyra caught his eye and smiled, he knew she understood. They had found each other against all odds, built something lasting from an imperfect beginning, and loved each other through everything the world could throw at them. It was not a fairy tale. There was no magic, no grand destiny. Just two people choosing each other day after day through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. And that, Malcolm thought as he reached for Lyra's hand across the table, was more than enough. It was everything.